Parshas Behaloscha, the third parsha in Sefer Bamidbar, starts with a very strange group of psukim about the menorah. It says, Daber al Aaron v'amarta, speaks to Aaron saying the following: Behaloschas haneros el mo penei ha-menorah ya'iru shivas haneros. When you kindle the menorah, towards the face of the menorah shall the 7 lamps cast light. When you light the menorah, right? So leaning towards each other. So there's a beautiful sforno about this that really parallels a Sfas Emes at the beginning of this week's parsha. The Sfas Emes, and this carries us in a transition from the last couple of weeks, addresses as Vayigash Elav Yehuda. Our parsha starts off, Yehuda still doesn't know who Yosef is, and they really come head to head to start this parsha, this confrontation over Binyamin and everything that's going on. So Yehuda steps up and it's really aggressive, and the Midrashim draw it out that there was so much friction and so much noise that the entire Egypt could hear what was going on, and they are head to head, they're going at it. And the Sfas Emes says this isn't the first time that Yehuda and Yosef are going at it, and this won't be the last time that they go about it, and this is the future of the Jewish people. I wish I could have brought the text with me, but they don't have it here in the Shul. But a very beautiful piece. And he says, think about it. Who is responsible, going 2 weeks back, for selling Yosef, for having Yosef sold to Mitzrayim? It's Yehuda, right? Who does Mashiach come from in the future? There's 2 Mashiachs, technically. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben Dovid. Mashiach ben Yosef obviously comes from the tribe of Yosef. Mashiach ben Dovid, Dovid is the great-grandson of Yehuda. He says these are not two, this is not just a sibling rivalry, this isn't just vengefulness between Yehuda and Yosef and jealousy. This is about fundamentally different approaches to Judaism. If you look in the descriptions of Yehuda and Yosef in the prophets, in Nevi'im, you find that Yosef is described as fire. He is the son of Yaakov. Beis Yaakov Eshu, Beis Yosef Lehava. Yosef is some kind of flame that takes after his father. And Yehuda in the Midrash is described as water. And it's only that they're complete opposites in every way. And yet both of them are critical for the success of the Jewish people. And he says that's what Vayigash Elav Yehuda is. This is really not just about one confrontation, but this pasuk is a reference to the confrontation of perspectives within the Jewish people that really is the unifying element throughout the timeline of Jewish history. Very interesting idea. Now, what exactly are Yosef and Yehuda debating? It's interesting. I thought the fire and water model is very interesting in terms of Barad, when the hail in Mitzrayim is described as being water and fire that have come together. But he develops this idea, talking about how Yosef and Yehuda really contrast each other. I was thinking about this because of coffee, and that's what reminds me of Haloscha, because Rosh Yeshiva in Kerem B'Yavneh, Rabbi Greenberg. So Rabbi Greenberg always used to quote, and I googled it tonight and I couldn't find it. So if you've heard it before, let me know what the source is. I thought he said it was from Rav Nachman of Breslov, but I could be wrong. That coffee is a perfect example of harmony, because coffee must be black and the milk has to be white, and the coffee is always bitter and the sugar has to be sweet. There's some kind of poem like this. And you want your coffee to be really hot, and you really hope that the milk is cold. Everything in the coffee is exactly the opposite. And when you put it all together, that's what makes a beautiful cup of coffee. So Rav Kook has these beautiful essays on harmony, and harmony in the Jewish people. And he says, don't fool yourself into thinking that what harmony means is that we can all find similarities. We can all find the ways that we're the same, and that's how we'll learn to coexist. We won't focus on our differences, we'll focus on what makes us similar. He says that's not what harmony is about. Harmony is about embracing the fact that people have different opinions. And not opinions that are similar, but not the way I would have phrased it, but opinions that are polar opposites. And he says that's the core of the Jewish people. I'll read you the line. The Gemara says at the end of Brachos, we say this in davening, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. People who study Torah bring peace into the world. So the joke that everyone makes about this statement in the Gemara is, well, all Talmidei Chachamim do is argue all the time. So what do you mean that they're marbim shalom? They increase shalom in the world. So Rav Kook writes the following. He says, Ein hakavana Shekulam sobrim umidabrim b'safa achas. It doesn't mean that all the rabbis think alike and all the rabbis speak to their congregations in the same way. Ela hashalom ha'amiti, true shalom, true peace, miskavesh dafka yidei riboy hadeos, is only accomplished through numerous opinions. Hainu sheyisro kol hatzadim chol hashitos, when all of the sides and all of the theories are all visible. V'yisbar sheyesh l'kol echad makom, and we find out that there's room for everyone in that proverbial fishbowl, or whatever you call it, right? Or pond. Kol echad l'fi arko, each one its own weight, mikomo v'inyano, its place and its topic. Everything has to be one in the same. Those were the words of Rav Kook. And he connects it with this Sforno, I think that has been popularized for other reasons, with this pasuk of Bahaloscha, and that's where we bring this back to the idea of Hanukkah. When you light these candles, they're all supposed to face towards the center. And that's how he interprets the pasuk. Bahaloscha haneros, when you kindle these candles, El mol penei ha-menorah ya'iru shivas haneros. It's only when it's El mol penei ha-menorah, when all of them face towards the center of the candelabra, of the menorah, that's when ya'iru shivas haneros. That's when the light of the 7 candles comes through in its strongest form, because they're all working towards the same goal. The words of the Svarno are as following. Kol hashiva ya'iru, all 7 of them will be lit. V'yashpiu ur elyon Yisrael, and they will, I don't know how to say this, but they will pour out a certain amount of light onto the entire Jewish people. Sheyoru hayos ur hayimanim v'ur hasmolim mechavi nuponel ur hakana emtzai. When the people on the right and the people on the left come together towards the middle, that's when you have an equal expression of Shekhinah throughout the entire Jewish people. Shehu ikra ha-menorah, the ikra of the menorah is right at the center. And then he says, what is the right and what's the left? Shekein roi shchunas ha-miminim ha-asukim b'chayi olam. People on the right, in this metaphor of the Svarno, are the people that are legitimately dedicated to growing in their Judaism. They're people that are sitting and learning Torah. They're people that are davening properly. And the people on the left, they're the ones who are dealing with things of this world, meaning they're involved in things that are less spiritual. Let's leave it at that.
Mundane.
Things that are mundane.
Cool.
And he says, if you don't have one, the other one's not going to survive. So Rav Greenberg always used to quote this with the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin says a beautiful thing. It says that Talmidei Chachamim, people that study Torah, rabbis, are comparable to grapes of a vine. But what is this metaphor all about? So the Gemara says the Talmid Chacham is the grapevines, and the people that are not the Talmidei Chacham, the people that don't have those aspirations, those are the branches. So Rav Greenberg pointed out very beautifully. The Gemara says that the anavim, the grapes, should always daven on behalf of the leaves. So what does that mean? So he pointed out that, are there any botanists in the room?
Anyone?
Botanists? Nobody? Me neither. So he pointed out that where do trees get their life from? From the sun. And where does it enter to the trees? Through the leaves. It enters through the green parts of the tree. That's photosynthesis, right? So photosynthesis is when it comes through the branches. So the grapes, you want to say, well, why would you plant a grapevine? For the leaves, you plant the grapevine because you want grapes. So the grapes should always be davening on behalf of the leaves, because without the leaves, the vine would never survive. And that's the mashal to the Jewish people, and that's what the Sforno is driving at over here. The menorah with its 7 branches describes people to the right and people to the left. But we shouldn't, like Rav Kook says, say, well, listen, there are people here, and we can hang to the right as long as they stay in their place, we'll stay in our place, and everyone will be okay. He says that's not what shalom is. Talmidei Chachamim bar b'shalom ba'olam is when they bring that all together. That's what the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash at least symbolized, and that's what this metaphor is in the Gemara in Chulin, that the Jewish people are supposed to be similar to the grapevine, and that's obviously the mashal with the coffee. So this notion of harmony is what the Sfas Emes develops at the beginning of the parsha. Vayigash elav Yehuda and Yosef are these 2 extremes of the menorah, one to the right and one to the left. And as younger brothers, they don't seem to be able to figure out who's what. Yehuda seems to be threatened by Yosef. Is Yosef trying to take over the future of the Jewish people? The brothers, Yehuda reacts poorly to that and makes these harsh decisions, not out of jealousy, but out of fear, that they're not really sure what Yosef is driving at. And it'll take a while. It'll take a lot of headbutting before they can figure out what each other's role is going to be. That's really their challenge in terms of shalom. Can they find a way to properly coexist? A friend of mine pointed out to me once on this topic. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. This is the machlokes that is l'shem shamayim is sofo lehiskayim, is bound to endure, and machlokes shelo l'shem shamayim sofo lehibatel, is bound to dissolve. So the Mishnah says, well, little quiz here. What's the example of a machlokes l'shem shamayim and a machlokes shelo l'shem shamayim?
L'shem shamayim was Korach.
So machlokes shelo l'shem shamayim, thank you very much, is Korach va'adasa. Korach and his constituents. And machlokes l'shem shamayim is, anybody remember?
I can guess it's Yehuda and Yosef.
No, right, not Yehuda and Yosef. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel.
Right.
So a friend of mine pointed something out to me that's unbelievable. Sometimes it's very hard to say things on Pirkei Avos that people haven't heard, but I bet you haven't heard this one yet. What are the two sides of the argument? Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai says it's mutter, Beit Hillel says it's aser. Beit Hillel says it's mutter, Beit Shammai says it's aser.
I don't understand what that means. What is that?
Beit Shammai has two opinions. One says it's permissible and one says it's prohibited. They're constantly arguing. Shammai and Hillel and the students of Shammai and students of Hillel can never get along. There are very few things that they agree about. And our challenge is to figure out, do we follow the opinion of Beit Shammai, do we follow the opinion of Beit Hillel? It's tricky to put those two together. What are the two sides of the machlokes shelo l'shem shamayim?
There really wasn't two sides, and that's why
Korach va'adaso is only one side. Who is Korach arguing with?
It doesn't say Moshe.
So Korach's arguing with nobody. Korach is essentially arguing with himself. And that's a beautiful idea on when we know our machlokes is legitimate. Are you willing to, when you're going to argue with people, are you willing to listen to what they have to say?
I thought he was arguing with Moshe.
Yeah, but how come Mishnah doesn't say it?
Why does the Mishnah say Korach va'adaso instead of Korach
It's Korach va'adaso, that's it.
He didn't care what Moshe said.
Right.
He was going to argue whatever Moshe said. It didn't matter.
The point that the Mishnah is making is that in order to enter into a machlokes properly, you have to tell yourself that there's a possibility that I may actually listen to what the other side has to say. If you're only coming in to make your point and to have what you think is right be expressed, then there's no point in having that machlokes. And that's the machlokes of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, that they legitimately came into every halachic debate to try and figure out what the truth was. That's Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Everybody's opinion is valued. Now, whose opinion are you going to follow? So that can get pretty aggressive. But all the opinions are welcome, and the bringing together of those different opinions really enhances the way that we answer our toughest questions. But Korach va'adaso was a one-sided argument, not in the sense that Korach was right, but in the sense that Korach really wasn't going to give Moshe any chance. So I think that's a very beautiful idea. And if you think about it, the phrase of that Mishnah, machlokes shehi l'shem shamayim sofo lehiskayim. So you think that's tragic, right? No resolution, but that's exactly the machlokes of Yosef and Yehuda. It's a machlokes that is bound to last eternally, because it'll come out that both sides will be necessary for the future of the Jewish people. Yosef and Yehuda's opinion, it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong. It's a question of, can we find a way for the two of them to move forward together? That's what it means as machlokes as sofo lehiskayim, and that's what happens in the sense that we have Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben Dovid. Now, who's the Iker? Whose opinion? Who's Mashiach? Who's going to be right? Who's going to be the focus of the redemption of the Jewish people? Okay, maybe it'll be Mashiach ben Dovid. Maybe it'll be the Mashiach that comes from Yehuda's descendants rather than the Mashiach that comes from Yosef's descendants. Who's going to play the large role? It's interesting. Who do we follow most of the time in terms of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, and then the world to come will follow. Mashiach comes, will follow the other one. It's very interesting that you have this kind of expression in all of these major debates in Jewish history. It's not a question of figuring out who's right or who's wrong. It's a question of balancing the two. I think that this is a very interesting idea in the Jewish community, because the Jewish community is excellent at machlokes. Right? Our communities are very good at finding ways to, I would say, to bifurcate ourselves from the other parts of the community. I wouldn't dive in there because right? The two guys, the guy who lives in Desert Island in both two shuls, the one he davens at and the one he doesn't daven at. I mean, that's it's sad, but it's true. That's very much the way that we live, and maybe that's part of our nature. We're always looking to do things in the correct way. We're always trying to follow halacha. I don't know if I ever told this story here or not, but I used to work at when I was working in the Shul in New York. So I did some work at a program called Manhattan Jewish Experience, which is a kiruv program in the city. And they do amazing work. And they used to have us come in Friday nights and join their Friday night dinners. We would sing Zmiros and whatever. So after one of the meals, the guy who ran the program asked me to lead benching. And he said, we're so honored to have the following people here. And for whatever reason, he decided to call me Rabbi Dovid Zirkind, which was not true. Still is not true. And someone came up to me, Rabbi Dovid Zirkind. I said, I'm not a rabbi yet, so it was inappropriate. But he was very,
we had the same thing here.
So I said, it's very generous of you, but unnecessary. But anyway, after benching was over, somebody came up to me, and they started talking to me, and they clearly had very, very little experience with Judaism. So the guy said, can I ask you some personal questions? So I was like, depends how personal, right? So they turned out to not be personal at all. So his first question was, do you keep kosher? Just give you a sense of what kind of person. So what did I say? I said, yes, I do. Or I said, I try to, or whatever. So he said, do you keep kosher all the time? So now my mother grew up in a non-religious community, and that's a legitimate question. Not in our community, not in my community, I should say, but that's a legitimate question. Okay, so you keep kosher in the home, but outside of the home is a different story, right? We're going to keep kosher. When do you keep kosher? You know, so I thought that was a very interesting question. Did you keep kosher all the time? So I said more or less, you know. We try. Because you can't say, there's an interesting discussion about that actually in Parsha Shmini, where the Torah says, V'hiskadishtem v'yisem kedoshim. You should make yourselves holy and you will be holy. In the discussion of animals that are kosher and animals that are non-kosher. So I forget who makes the comment on that pasuk, but it's obvious that it's redundant. You should make yourselves holy and you will be holy. So the explanation that was given is that the hiskadishtem means, and you should attempt to make yourself holy. You cannot dictate everything that you swallow is going to be kosher. You're banking on your wife, you're banking on the chef, you're banking on the COR or whoever it is to do the best that they can to ensure that the food you eat is as kosher as possible, but no one's perfect. So how are you going to ensure that everything you eat is kosher? You're not. You're going to do the best that you can. You should try and make yourselves kadosh. You should try and make yourselves pure. And then Hashem says, V'yisem kedoshim. If you put in the effort, He'll do the rest, and He'll make sure that it happens. So we try and keep kosher most of the time. So then he says to me, do you do Shabbat? Those are his exact words. I remember it very well. So I said, yeah. So then he says, do you do Shabbat every week? And I said, yes, I do. Now I'm getting the trend, right? So he said, oh, so you're basically... I was like, I'm basically what? He's like, you're...
Couldn't think of the word orthodox.
So you're...
A label.
You're Hasidic. So I was like, are you crazy? Like, what do I look like? You know, it was a Friday night. I had a suit on and maybe a hat, but like...
Funny. What's that?
An outreach.
And I just remember walking away from that, and I took that as a very powerful lesson. Because in a sense, we're all Hasidic, all the people that sit in this room. Relatives who aren't so religious, they're not so comfortable with the way that we keep kosher. They're making a family get-together, and it's on a Saturday, and can't you just take 1 week off? And what do you say? I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And they give me a break. I'm like, not one Saturday. You can't just come. We have to order you separate food. Everybody gets this who has some relatives, business. Yeah. Everybody gets it at some point. I have a lot of relatives myself that aren't religious. I get this all the time. You can't make one exception.
You know? That's them. They can't order from kosher.
Yeah. So they say you can't make one exception. So what he said to me is, he said,
to keep the family.
how would you describe that person, that Hasidic guy that you? I mean, I used to in Borough Park. You said in Toronto there are enough of them, right? So how would you describe that? That's not me. What do I look like? Hasidic? I'm a Hasidic Yid.
You got a beard.
Right? You invite. Maybe you'll invite. I don't know who are those Hasidim, the traveling Hasidim here.
Yeah.
Right, but you invite them. You're not Hasidic, even if you do invite them for Shabbos.
Sorry.
Right? But from an outsider's perspective, so what's the difference between me and that Hasidish guy? Okay, he wears a long coat, he wears a short coat. His hat has a lot of fur, his hat has less fur. We in this room, you in this room, think I'm crazy. I'm not Hasidish at all. But ask your relatives who can't understand why you make no compromises. Zero exception. We're going to eat kosher all the time. We're going to do Shabbat every week. And that's it. So are we Hasidish? I don't think so. But there are times when we get so caught up in our communities by saying, hey, this is me and that's them, that we totally forget how similar we are. To a certain extent, we're similar to the non-religious world also. Relative to other, unfortunately, we find that out in more difficult periods in Jewish history than we do in the comfortable periods in Jewish history. But that's just a reality. I took that as a very powerful muster, that conversation. I learned a lot from people at those programs, as an aside. But that's the idea of balancing ourselves. A little bit of it is a perspective. That's part of it. Part of it is just learning to be more peaceful people and more tolerant people. But also, we do have to look at our similarities at the same time and say, we're not as different as we would like to think that we are. I don't look that weird. I don't sound like that. But we do. And then the question is, can we find a way to embrace those differences and say, listen, you have your way of looking at things and I have my way of looking at things, but together we built one big Jewish menorah. And that's basically Bahalos Chasaneros, and that's supposedly that's what the Sfas Emes is saying in terms of the balance between Yehuda and Yosef. The question is, can Yehuda and Yosef find a way to embrace each other as siblings? We talked last week about Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch's approach to the way that Yosef manipulated his brothers in last week's Parsha. And he said that all Yosef was trying to do was find a way to show himself and show his brothers that they could be a family once again. And in the larger scale of Jewish history, that's really what's going on between Yehuda and Yosef. Can Yehuda and Yosef find a way for the two of them to work together and to build off their mistakes? Yehuda is the expert on doing tshuva. Yehuda is the expert on building off his mistakes. He starts out making a bunch of terrible mistakes. It's interesting. Yehuda is the one who goes to Yaakov with the Kisonis Pasim, with Yosef's multicolored coat. And he shows it to him dipped in blood. And what's the term Yehuda uses? He says, Hakerna, Hakisones ben Chahim lo. He says, Hakerna, do you recognize this? Please recognize. Right? He says to Yaakov, do you see this coat? Do you see it? What do you think happened? He's not going to lie to his father. He says, Abba, what do you think? So what does he say? Well, look, Yosef was eaten by a wild animal, and that's where it's his blood. It's all over the coat, which was not the truth. After that story, so Yehuda fails. And he stumbles with this incident with Tamar. He doesn't realize who she is, and they sleep together, and she's pregnant. She's accused of, even though she was supposed to do Yibum, so they're going to put her to death. And Tamar is taken, and she still has the collateral that he gave as wages for prostitution to Tamar. And she doesn't want to embarrass him in public. That's what the Chazal said. God forbid she should embarrass the person who's the cause for her being killed. She wouldn't do that. That's a different discussion entirely. A very powerful idea. And what does she do? She pulls out his staff and signet ring. She pulls out those collateral that Yehuda gave her. And what's the term she uses? She says, Hakerna mi'achol semes v'hapsilim. Please recognize, whose are these? And if anyone can tell me whose these are, that's the father of my child. And it's Yehuda's challenge to fix his first mistake and to admit in public that he had made a second. And that is a very unbelievable idea. And this is Yehuda's major nisayon. Can Yehuda overcome it? And we talk about Yehuda as the future of the leadership of the Jewish people, that the kings will come from Yehuda. And Yehuda has a lot of shady mistakes in his past. And it's not that Yehuda is perfect, but it's that Yehuda has some tremendous ability in doing tshuva. And Yehuda really conquers a lot. Not as maybe I wouldn't say his life is as difficult as Yosef's, but he has a very difficult time. And Yehuda's challenge is to build off that. And now in this week's parsha, we see Yehuda and Yosef are getting back together. Yehuda sticks up for his brothers. He sticks up for Binyamin. And if they can find a way to coexist, so that is the future of the Jewish people. And that's what we hope for in the times of Mashiach. Mashiach the son of Dovid, Mashiach, the son of Yosef as well. So that's a first idea about the menorah and about the coffee. Okay. As we have done a few of the weeks in this year, we've been talking about, I think, lesser known sections of the Parsha. This way there's no overlap with whatever you hear on Shabbos. And if you look on the first source on your sheets, it's Parak Memvav, it's chapter 46, both the Hebrew and on the English. And if you look here, what we basically have, we'll jump in the story to the point when the brothers go back to Yaakov and they say Yosef is alive, and Yaakov says they don't believe you, and they prove it to him, and he basically says, okay, it's time to go down to Egypt. Yosef says we need to come down, there's no food in Eretz Canaan, we've got to make the move. So that's where we pick up, chapter 46. Vayisa Yisrael v'chol asher yesh lo, vayavo be'ir hashava. Yisrael, Israel, and all of the family that were with him traveled to Be'er Sheva, still inside Eretz Canaan, still in Israel. And now Yaakov stops and he starts bringing offerings or karbanos to his father Yitzchak before he leaves. So what is Yaakov doing? And there's an interesting discussion here also. How come it says Leilokei Aviv Yitzchak, the father, the God of his father Isaac? What about the God of his grandfather Abraham? So Rashi comments here, Chayiv Adam b'chvod Aviv Yoser michvod Zikno. Here we learn that a person is more responsible to have kivud av, to honor his father and his mother, more than his grandfather and his grandmother. Which is interesting. You could, I think, argue logically that shouldn't be true. If I'm supposed to honor my father, and my father has an obligation to honor his father, so how much more so I have an obligation to honor my grandfather? And obviously the question would be when those two things come in conflict. My grandfather wants A and my father wants B, and they can't get along as per the first half of this year. So then who do you follow? So you see from this pasuk that Leilokei Aviv Yitzchak, first comes your father and your grandfather after that. The reverse discussion is true when it comes to inheritance. What is the relationship between children and their grandparents in terms of are they considered direct descendants of their grandfathers or not? It's another interesting discussion that kind of relates. So Ben Beno is a grandson considered like a son. How direct is that relationship? So that's just one small point. Okay, so Yaakov gets there and he brings his sacrifices. Vayomer Elokim Yisrael v'marus halayla. So Yaakov has a dream at night, and God says to him, Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov. He calls out to him. But whenever you have that Yaakov, Yaakov twice, it's like he's calling out his name, waiting for an answer. Vayomer Hineni, and Yaakov says back, here I am. Vayomer, God says, Anochi hakel Elokei avicha. I am the God, the Lord of your father. Al tira merda Mitzrayma. Don't fear going down to Egypt. Because there I will make you into a great nation. Anochi eredim Mitzrayma. We're going to focus on this verse 4. I'll go down to Egypt with you. Anochi alcha gamalo, and I will also bring you up. The Yosef yashis yado alinecha, and Yosef will place his hands upon your side, meaning Yosef will take care of you while you're in Egypt. So God says, don't worry. I want you to go down. I'm going to go down. I'm going to come up with you at the end, and don't worry, while you're there, Yosef is going to take care of everything. Vayakom Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva. So Yaakov gets up from Be'er Sheva. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael Yaakov avihem, and the children of Israel take Yaakov and their children and their wives in the wagons that Paro had sent to bring back. Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is draw a comparison between this prophecy of Yaakov and the famous prophecy of Yaakov when he encounters Jacob's ladder. And we'll find out that these two dreams are very similar. And this one is obviously lesser known, which is the purpose of why we're doing this. If you look at the Kli Yakar in source number 2, we've been quoting from during the year, so he has a really beautiful idea here, going back on verse 4, on Pasuk Dalet. The terminology is precise, that God says to him, I'll go down with you, placing the descent of the Spirit before his own. Meaning, if you look at the pasuk, if you look at source 4, I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will also bring you up. So who goes down first? So the Kli Yakar says, God goes first. I will go down with you, because technically in the verse, it says, I will go down before with you, placing the descent of the Spirit before his own. And regarding the ascent, meaning when they leave Egypt, it says the parallel opposite, and I will bring you up and ascend. Look at the verse. It says, Anochi a'alcha gam alo. I will go up and I will bring you up. That's how he's reading it. Jacob first, and then ascend, referring to the Spirit. So he says a beautiful parable. He says the parable would be to one who brings a friend to deep waters, and the friend is afraid to go down from fear of drowning in its depths. Meaning you have two guys, and one of them knows how to swim, and one of them doesn't. Therefore, the friend says he won't enter until the leader enters first. He says, if you jump in the water, I'll jump in the water after you. So who has to go first? The one who knows how to swim has to go. But when leaving, he doesn't want to be led and left in the water alone. Rather, he goes up first and the leader follows. So why is this happening? All this in order that in descent and ascent, he will not be left alone even 1 second in the water. So too God doesn't allow Israel to be left 1 second without the divine Spirit. And therefore the Spirit descends first and Jacob ascends first on the exit. So now that first point, Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayma, that I will go down, that it actually is God going first. That's a tricky, grammatically speaking, that's tricky. But the message is very beautiful. You know, we talked 2 Shabbosim ago, when I was here for Shabbos, we talked about the Das Canaan. The Midrash mentions that a parable when Yosef goes down to Mitzrayim. When Yosef is sold down, so there's a parable of a man who owns 12 donkeys, and they're walking through the street, and each of them is carrying a barrel of wine. And one of the 12 donkeys veers off into the property of a non-Jew, and the owner is afraid that the non-Jew is going to pick up the barrel, and then it's going to be touched by a non-Jew, and it's not going to be kosher, and he's going to lose the whole barrel. So he runs after that barrel to get it, and he abandons all 11 in the street. You know, so the pasuk says, "Vayihi Hashem es Yosef." God was with Joseph. So the Midrash asked that question: God was with Joseph, and He's not with anybody else. So the parable is that this was such a dangerous, spiritually speaking, such a dangerous situation, that God felt it was, so to speak, worth abandoning everybody else for fear that Yosef would be lost spiritually by being in Egypt. So here, in a sense, you find the same kind of thing. That now Jacob is going down, and what is God saying to him? I know you're afraid. I know you don't want to go there. I know this is not your first choice. But He says, I can tell you two things. First of all, I'm going before you. Second of all, I won't leave the water until you leave the water. And third of all, while you're there, Yosef is there. In that context, you could explain the verse that Yosef is there, meaning Yosef did it. Yosef wasn't alone. Yosef knew that he wasn't alone. He was capable of surviving Egypt, and he did better than just survive. Yosef thrives in Egypt. So he says to Yaakov, God says to Yaakov, don't worry, you can survive also. It's a very interesting idea. But what the Meshech Chochmah focuses on in source 3 is that this prophecy takes place at night. Vayomer Elokim Yisrael b'maros halayla. Vayomer Yaakov. God comes to Jacob in this dream at nighttime. He says, behold, Eitzel Avraham Yitzchak lo matzanu zeh, rak b'Yaakov kan. When you talk about the dreams of Abraham and the dreams of Yitzchak, these are dreams that happen by day. But this is not the first time that Yaakov has a prophecy at nighttime. The dream with Jacob's ladder, the sun set, meaning God wanted him to sleep at that specific place, and while he sleeps, God comes to him in this vision of the dream with the ladder and the angels going up and down. So now we have the same thing, that God doesn't just appear to Yaakov, God appears to Yaakov at night. Hainu, so he says this is because he was preparing to, that's a typo, prepared to live outside of Israel. So thus God reveals Himself to him at night to show him that even by night, in the darkness of exile, here the night being a metaphor, the Shekhinah shines on Israel. The Spirit of God is there. Like we're taught, exiled to Babylonia, the Spirit was with them. The same idea that when the Jews were sent in exile to Babel, so God was with them. So nighttime here doesn't just mean that God appears to Yaakov at night. But remember, the first time this is true also, and here's the similarity between these two events. Yaakov has these visions when he's about to leave Israel. When he runs away from Esau and he goes to look for a wife outside of Israel, God comes to him at night. And when he leaves Israel to go down to Egypt to see Joseph, God comes to him at night. It doesn't just mean that God only appears to Jacob at nighttime. That he doesn't have this higher level of prophecy where God appears to him at daytime and only appears when he's asleep. It's not just dreams, it's prophecy. But the nighttime is a symbol of the fact that these are encounters that Yaakov is going to have with the outside world, with the darkness of the exile. And God comes to him in preparation for those experiences in diaspora at nighttime. Doesn't mean God comes to strengthen him before he goes out. You know, the Avos, the forefathers, I'll take a step back. The Gemara says in Brachos that there are two different opinions as what the source for our prayers are. That we pray once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and once at night. So one opinion that we have brought down in the Gemara is the opinion that it's based on the karbanos, the sacrifices that they used to bring in the temple. And the second opinion is that it's patterned after the fact that all three of the forefathers, the Torah specifically tells us that they prayed. So that's the next step in this commentary of the Meshech Chochmah. For this we're taught Abraham instituted morning prayers, Isaac afternoon, and Jacob evening. And then he goes on to a little bit of a discussion about a reference at least to the karbanos that were brought at night and how that parallels it. Yaakov is the one who was mitakin, who instituted Tfilas Arvis, who instituted Mariv. And it's interesting in this context that he is the one who experiences, of the three Avos, he experiences the exile, he experiences those periods of darkness in his life, and he is the one who institutes Mariv of the three Tfilos. Our rabbis taught the divine spirit only shines in the diaspora to one that merited in it in Israel, as it states by Yecheskel. Therefore, the end of the worship, burning of limbs is done even at night, etc. So the karbanos that we're referring to were karbanos that could be brought in the temple, sacrifices that can be brought at nighttime. And that's the same idea, he's saying, even in the terms of the realm of sacrifices, to the fact that Yaakov davened at night. And in this context, it's not exactly that Yaakov just prayed at night, but Yaakov prayed when things were getting rough. At least that's the symbolism of Tfilas Mariv. So the Meshech Chochmah points out that a person only experiences prophecy outside of the land of Israel if they had already experienced some kind of revelation while they lived in the land of Israel. That's the power of the land of Israel, that the Torah says, Einei Hashem Elokecha, that the eyes of God are focused on the land of Israel specifically. So the question that the Meshech Chochmah is going to deal with is a very practical question, which is, how do we expect to have levels of prophecy, connections to God, people that have lived their whole lives? And remember, the Meshech Chochmah himself lived in Europe his whole life. So how are we supposed to have that experience if we're not in the land of Israel? You know, he quotes the pasuk in Tehillim in that second paragraph. You know, it states in Psalms, Parak Chaf Pasuk Beis, God will answer you on the day, Yancha Hashem biyom tzara, God will answer you on the day of suffering, Yisagev Hashem Elokei Yaakov, and the name of the God of Jacob will strengthen you. So it's interesting that Yancha Hashem biyom tzara, God will answer you on the day of suffering, and Yisagev Hashem Elokei Yaakov is the opposite, that the God of Jacob will support you. When will he support you? In the opposite, in the nighttime. That God is there for you by day, but you also see from Yaakov that God is there for you at night. So he says something very beautiful. From this we learn an important lesson. He says that when the Jewish people grasp the beautiful tradition and follow the path and the teachings of their fathers, then the Jew is the nation of the older days, to whom God revealed himself when the temple was in its place. Then God appears even in the diaspora, even by night. He says it doesn't mean that you have to actually be someone who physically lived in the land of Israel to have that experience. You need to be connected, just like the person who leaves Israel but is still connected to his personal past experiences living in the land of Israel. We have that ability if we connect to our forefathers, if we connect to our tradition that has its core in the land of Israel. Abraham taking over the land of Israel, and the prophecies that existed at that time, the spirituality that existed in the land of Israel at that time, if we connect ourselves through Jewish history to that experience, so we're capable of having that same level of revelation. So then God appears even in the diaspora, even by night. But when they forget the covenant of their fathers and don't walk in their ways, so then they are on their own, and spirit doesn't shine in the exile. If we choose new paths, if we forsake the traditions of the Jewish people, so then having that experience outside of the land of Israel is going to be that much harder. It's about the continuity of the Jewish people that gives us the strength, even though we're not in the land of Israel. So the Spirit leaves them because they don't see themselves as the ancient people, as the people of the past. So this is a very interesting idea. Yaakov is, according to the Meshech Chochmah, the model of the Jew in exile. And Yaakov is the one who institutes Mariv. Yaakov is the one who institutes the evening prayers, because he is the one who experiences darkness, both in his first search for a wife and running from Esav, and now again as he leaves for Egypt. And that's essentially what God does in both of these prophecies. Hashem Yishmor Tzeischal Vo'echa. God is going to watch after Yaakov when he leaves for Chutz La'aretz. When Yaakov leaves for the exile, God comes to him both times and says, don't worry, I jump in first and I'll wait till you're out before I leave the pool. And everything's going to be okay. I'm there for you, Yosef is there for you, you're able to do it. But the Meshech Chochmah is pointing out that Yaakov's strength comes from his religious experience in Israel. He has that ability to carry with him those experiences and bring them with him to Mitzrayim. He has a Yosef who can provide for him a land of Goshen, a place where the Jewish people can live, at least initially, in isolation, and they'll be safe. But not every person has the luxury that Yaakov had of building those experiences. And his point is that we're supposed to build off of the past in the hopes that we can strengthen ourselves through the efforts of our forefathers, which I think is a very interesting idea. I think one way to explain this is to say that we really have no idea what he's talking about. And to say that this is prophecy, and what does it mean that a person who experiences prophecy in Israel can experience prophecy outside of Israel and not, and the opposite is not true. But I think there's another level of this that is that's a little bit more practical, and I think a little bit more, in that sense, it's more meaningful at least. So last summer I was working at the Shul in New York, so a lot of stories from that Shul. So unfortunately the rabbi decided that during my last month at the Shul he would use that opportunity to go to Israel while I would cover for him, which was a smart idea on his part, and it was a great experience for me. So we sat down a week before he left for Israel, and he was right. He was going to be gone for Shivas or B'Tammuz and for Tisha B'Av. He was gone for a long time. So I wanted to sit down with him and review. I'd never been in the Shul for Tisha B'Av before. How he does it, when they show the movies, which movies they show. We got like 45 movies in the mail. We only showed 3 of them, I think. It's crazy. But no one told me that we were supposed to collect money for them either, so that was a little bit of a problem. But people got a free showing on my behalf. My apologies to Aish and OU and whoever else was. But I remember I said to him, I don't want to jinx it or anything. I said, what do I do if there's a funeral? Here's one of those important questions. There isn't going to be a wedding, we knew that. Right. But what if there's a funeral? So he said, listen, it's a small shul. And people have other rabbis, and they this and they that. Everything's going to be okay. Like, it'll be alright, So 2 days after he left, I learned in a kollel in Passaic for the summer. So I get a phone call from the secretary of the shul, and she says, Dr. So-and-so would like you to call his mother-in-law just passed away. I was like, this is spectacular. I didn't even get one Shabbos, right? So I didn't know all the families in the shul, but I did know that family. I did not know the woman's mother who had passed away. So I was extremely nervous, and I was thankful that I was in Passaic, so I had a Rabbi in the kollel there who would give me everything that I needed in theory. So he's standing right next to me, and I call the doctor back, and I say, I got a call to call you from the office, so what's going on? So he said, my mother-in-law passed away. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. And the first thing I said to him is, what's happening with the funeral? So he said, well, our kids are in this school, and their Rebbe is very close with us and helped us make a lot of decisions about end-of-life things, and he's going to be officiating at the funeral. I said, that's great news. That's great news. He said, but it would be very meaningful if someone from the shul could represent and say Dvar Torah at the funeral. So I said, okay. So I said, you want a Dvar Torah? That's not a problem. He said, yeah, preferably if you could speak about the Parsha, or you could, whatever. So I said, that's no problem. I said, anything else? He said, no, that's it. I said, wonderful. Not really wonderful, but okay, fine. So the next day I spoke at my first funeral. So I went into the daven at the shul the next morning, and I sat down in the library at the shul, and I was pulled out all the books, and I said, okay, let's see what we got, So it was double parsha, Matzos Maseh, and the story of the daughters of Tzlafchad. And I started going through all the good cheap books that have all the quick Divrei Torah in them, and Siyata D'Shmaya, I found something unbelievable. How do you speak at a funeral? Not that you should ever have to, of someone you never met. That was the question I was dealing with. Someone told me, part of the smicha program, we had a panel of shuls that had search committees for rabbis that have since hired rabbis, and they sent the heads of their search committees to Yeshiva University to meet with us and to talk to us about their experiences with people that applied for their jobs, why they did get the jobs that they got, why they didn't. So one shul requested from their rabbis, I didn't like this in general, but it was very interesting, that they requested from the rabbis to give a eulogy in front of the board, or the search committee. They should see what the rabbis are like. So one rabbi got up in front of the search committee, and he gave an extremely powerful eulogy, and he cried. And the people on the search committee said, there's no way he's getting the job, because what kind of sincere person cries at a eulogy for someone that doesn't exist? If that's the kind of person you're going to have, and to a certain extent I hear it, but how do you realistically get up, and not to mention it's the first time I ever speak at a funeral, but how do you get up at a funeral and speak about somebody you don't know? So I found the perfect solution, which is to talk about the people you do know. If you look in source 4, Vatikravna benot Tzlafchad, the daughters of Tzlafchad approached. Who were they? Ben Chefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Mechir, Ben Menashe, Lemishpachos Menashe ben Yosef. They are the sons of Chefer, who was the son of Gilad, who was the son of Mechir, who was the son of Menashe, who was from the family of Menashe, the son of Yosef. Coincidentally, it's Yosef here, just a coincidence. We're talking about Yosef. The Eilesh Shemos ben Osav, and these were the names of his daughters, Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milka, and Sirza. Okay. This pasuk is extremely detailed. Who were the Benot Tzlafchad? All the way back to Yosef. But even in doing that, it repeats Menashe twice. The sons of Chefer, the sons of Gilad, the son of Mechir, the son of Menashe, of the family of Yosef. We know who Menashe is. Why does it say Menashe twice? So Rashi here says something interesting. Rashi says, Lama Nemar, source number 5, V'halok far Nemar ben Menashe. We already know it. He's the son of Menashe, so he's the son of Yosef. El Alomar Lacha, Yosef Chibev Es Aretz. Joseph loved the land of Israel. Shenemar V'halisem Es Atzmosai, something we talked about in the past, that Yosef wants to be buried specifically in the land of Israel. We talked about that. Ubenosav Chivu Es Aretz. His great-great-granddaughters start this whole appeal so that they will also have rights to their own property in the land of Israel. So just like Yosef was compassionate about the land of Israel, so too his kids. Shenemar Tinalanu Achuzah. And then Rashi says the second interpretation, that everyone in this family changed from Yosef were all righteous people. All of his kids and grandkids and great-grandkids and great-granddaughters, etc. were all tzaddikim. So the first interpretation of Rashi is a little bit ambiguous. The Torah goes out of its way to list everyone who we have in other places. All of these children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Yosef, who was the great-grandson of Menashe, who was the son of Yosef, because we know that Yosef was a Zionist, and his great-granddaughters were also. So what does that do for me? That's great. It's not worth writing a whole extra pasuk over it. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his sefer, which I have here for other reasons, but his sefer Darash Moshe, which was Rav Moshe's sefer on the Parsha, he has some sermons in the back also. He has a very interesting answer. And he says, Einu Doma, it's not the same. There's no similarity between someone who practices Judaism because they have determined on their own that it's the right thing, and someone who practices their religion because they know that it's the tradition of their people. If you come to the realization that there's one God, you're the modern day Abraham, and you come to the realization that there's a God, and God believes in this, and God values this, and I understand it, so I'm going to follow it. Even if you come to the exact same conclusions as we have it brought down in our Chumash, in our Shulchan Aruch, in our codes of Jewish law, it's not the same. Because that's a Judaism that you want. It's a Judaism that's convenient. It's not a Judaism that is the tradition that we received at Sinai. And what we're saying here, says Rav Moshe, is that the daughters of Slavka didn't make a stink and say, Israel's important. Why did they say it? Because they had nowhere to live. So they wanted free real estate. So they would come in and they say, this mitzvah is very important to us. We believe in the land of Israel. Everyone deserves a plot. That's not a convincing argument. All of a sudden they love Israel. I'll tell you why they love Israel. Because they need a place to live. But what Rashi's pointing out, what the Torah is emphasizing, is Moshe saw sincerity. You talk about Machlokas L'Shem Shemayim. The Gemara speaks very highly of the daughters of Slavchad. Daughters of Slavchad come in, and their argument is not, we need a place to live, give us free real estate. Their argument is that this is a tradition. Our Jewish people are still carrying the bones of Yosef HaTzadik, our great-grandfather, because he refused to be buried anywhere outside the land of Israel. And now what are you telling us? We have nowhere to bury him. Maybe he would have been buried in other parts of the Sheva. And now you're telling us that his great-grandchildren don't deserve a plot. They weren't there for selfish motives. They were there for themselves. And in the context of that funeral, I said when you see families that follow the same traditions, you see that they're not friendly people because they're naturally friendly, and they're not, they don't do chesed because it makes them feel warm and fuzzy inside. But they do this because it's part of their value system. And that's a way to think about what kind of family someone comes from, even if you never met their parents and grandparents before. And I think that really is a more pragmatic approach to the Meshech Chochmah. Because what's the Meshech Chochmah saying? How is Yaakov going to deal with these experiences? He needs to draw on his experiences from Israel in order to survive in Egypt. So he says, what does that do for me? I never stepped foot in Israel. So he said, yeah, but I can connect myself to my forefathers. I can recognize that the tradition that I work with is not something that I came up with. It's not something that I think is creative and convenient and something that I find inspiring. It's more than that. It's that with that inspiration and with the convenience and the social benefits of being part of the community, I also recognize that I'm one link in the chain of Jewish history. And that's that message of Tfilas Arvis, the idea of davening Mariv. That if we see ourselves as part of that, so it's also, it's a great thing, but it's also a responsibility that we have to be part of the future of the people. And if we connect ourselves to that past by recognizing our place in history, so that gives us the strength and the support of everyone who's come before us. When we say the Zechus Avos, the merit of our forefathers, that we know that we're going to be okay, we're going to survive, that God said to Yaakov, I'm going to lead you in and I'm not going to leave the pool until you get out. So he's talking about us. He's talking about us and our goals also. And the key, the Meshech Chochmah is saying, is that we need to see ourselves as being in the same pond as Yaakov. And if we recognize that God wouldn't let us in until he stepped in first, we also know that God's not going to leave until we get out. And I think that's an important perspective on life in diaspora for us. And that's it.
Also our own personal goliath, our own personal problems that are happening in our life, to know that Hashem is in the pool with us.
Absolutely. Imo Anochi B'Tzara is the most fascinating nechama. I think we pointed this out once before, that it's very strange when you talk about visiting someone in the Shiva house. So when you say, Chama Kol Minachem Esam, God should comfort you. Obviously, how much comfort are we going to provide? B'Sof Shar Vei Tzion Yerushalayim. So what's that all about? So it's about making sure, at least the one thing people should know is that they're not alone. But the one thing we know in all of history is that, at least through Tanakh, we see that the number one reason we're not alone is because God is always with us. That God goes into exile with the Jewish people also. And that is Yaakov's dream. You think about the angels going up and the angels going down. That's his first dream when he goes out the first time. And that's the exact same image, more or less, that he gets when he goes down to Mitzrayim in this week's Parsha.